The call came at exactly 2:18 on a quiet Wednesday afternoon. I was sitting at my dining table with a notebook, balancing my retirement budget the way I had done every month since leaving my accounting job 6 years earlier. At 66, numbers still brought me comfort. They always made sense, unlike people. When my daughter Melissa Harper appeared on the screen, I smiled before answering. "Hi, sweetheart." Her reply came quickly, almost rehearsed. "Hey, Mom, I just wanted to let you know that we're already on our way to Tennessee." I frowned. "On your way?" "Yeah. Actually, we moved yesterday." For several seconds, I didn't say a word. "You moved?" "Well," she laughed nervously. "Everything happened so fast. We packed, signed the lease, and hit the road. We meant to call sooner." I stared at the untouched cup of tea beside me. Tennessee, nearly 1,000 miles away. She wasn't talking about a weekend trip. She was telling me she had moved my 2 grandchildren to another state without even mentioning it beforehand. People didn't forget something like that. They avoided it. Behind her voice, I heard her husband, Derek, saying something about stopping for lunch. "Melissa," I asked calmly, "how long have you been planning this?" There was a pause. "A few weeks." That answer told me everything. She hadn't forgotten. She had simply decided I didn't deserve to know. "I understand," I said quietly. "Mom, don't be upset. I'm not upset. That wasn't entirely true. I wasn't angry. I was disappointed. After all the years I had spent helping them survive every financial emergency, I had expected at least a goodbye." "Drive safely," I told her. Before she could answer, I ended the call. The house became painfully silent. I remained seated for nearly a minute before opening my laptop. If Melissa believed she was independent enough to move her family across the country without discussing it with me, then she was independent enough to support that decision herself. For the past 4 years, I had quietly carried a large part of their financial burden, not because they demanded it, because I loved my grandchildren. Every month I covered expenses they barely noticed anymore: groceries, their family phone plan, a credit card I had added Melissa to after her first child was born, car insurance, streaming subscriptions, emergency cash transfers that somehow happened every other week. Little by little, my generosity had become their expectation. Today, that ended. I logged into my bank account. The first task was simple. Melissa's name still appeared as an authorized user on one of my credit cards. Originally, it had been for diapers and baby formula. Recently, the statements looked different: restaurant dinners, online shopping, vacation fuel, coffee shops. None of it qualified as an emergency. I clicked Remove Authorized User. A confirmation window appeared. I didn't hesitate. 1 click done. Next came the family mobile plan. I had been paying for 4 phone lines: mine, Melissa's, Derek's, and a tablet they insisted the children needed. The contract renewed in 2 days. Perfect timing. I scheduled both adult lines for cancellation when the billing cycle ended. Again, done. I closed my laptop and leaned back. Instead of guilt, I felt something unexpected. Relief. That evening, my son Daniel stopped by after work carrying takeout containers. One look at my face made him stop smiling. "What happened?" "Your sister moved." "Moved where?" "Tennessee." His eyebrows shot upward. "When?" "Yesterday." "And she just told you now?" I nodded. Daniel slowly placed the food on the kitchen counter. "She didn't tell me either." For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, he asked, "Are you okay?" "I think so." Then a thought crossed my mind. "I want to check something." I walked down the hallway toward the guest bedroom. Most people called it a guest room. I called it the grandchildren's room. Bright blue curtains, a bookshelf, plastic dinosaurs, art supplies, winter coats, everything a child might need during weekend visits. I pushed open the door. My footsteps stopped. Half the shelves were empty. The expensive stroller I kept folded in the closet was gone. The children's winter jackets had disappeared. Several toys were missing. Even the baby monitor had vanished. Suddenly, every Sunday visit over the past month made perfect sense. Melissa hadn't been visiting me. She had been collecting supplies for the move, piece by piece. Without asking, Daniel quietly stepped into the doorway behind me. His expression hardened. They planned this. Yes, They've been taking your things. I slowly nodded. The sadness I expected never came. Instead, I felt something colder. Clarity. I turned toward Daniel. Would you help me tomorrow? With what? I looked around the half-empty room one last time. I'm finally going to take my house back. The following morning, I woke before sunrise. For the first time in years, I didn't check my phone expecting another message asking for money. No emergency. No last-minute babysitting request. No, Mom, can you help us just this once? The silence felt unfamiliar and peaceful. After breakfast, Daniel arrived carrying a toolbox and 2 cups of coffee. You ready? He asked. I smiled faintly. More than I thought I'd be. Instead of starting with the locks, I walked back into the grandchildren's room. The space still looked incomplete. Empty shelves reminded me that Melissa had quietly carried things out of my home over several weeks while pretending nothing was changing. I opened the closet. Only a few old toys remained. I carefully placed them into donation boxes. The tiny bed was stripped of its colorful blankets. The cartoon curtains came down. Every item I packed away made the room feel less like a shrine to someone else's family and more like part of my own home again. Daniel watched quietly. You've wanted a sewing room for years. I kept putting it off. Why? I laughed softly. Because I kept believing the kids would need this room. They still might visit. If they do, I replied, they'll always be welcome. I paused before adding, but they don't need an entire room waiting for them every day of the year. By lunchtime, the room looked completely different. It wasn't empty. It was full of possibilities. A reading chair would fit perfectly near the window. A sewing table could go against the far wall. Maybe even a small bookshelf I'd always wanted. For the first time in years, I was making plans that revolved around me instead of everyone else. As Daniel loaded donation boxes into his truck, my tablet chimed on the kitchen counter. Fraud alert. Attempted purchase declined 163.40 Us. Gas station, Little Rock, Arkansas. I stared at the notification for a moment before smiling. They had reached for the credit card without thinking. Only then had they discovered it no longer belonged to them. I dismissed the alert and returned to making lunch. Less than an hour later, my phone rang. Melissa, I answered calmly. Hello. Her voice exploded through the speaker. Mom, what happened to the card? I removed you yesterday. What? It isn't yours anymore. There was complete silence. Then Derek grabbed the phone. Margaret, what are you doing? His tone irritated me immediately. Not once in 10 years had he called me Mom, only Margaret, usually when he wanted something. We're stranded at a gas station. I doubt you're stranded. The card was declined. Yes, the kids are in the back seat. I know you have children. His breathing grew louder. We need gas. I believe gas stations accept debit cards. We're low on money because of the move. I folded a kitchen towel before answering. That's unfortunate. You've always helped before. I also expected to know when my daughter was moving 1,000 miles away. This isn't the time for a lecture. No, I agreed. It's the time for responsibility. He raised his voice. So you're just abandoning your grandkids? There it was. Whenever they wanted something, my grandchildren became emotional shields. It had worked for years, not today. I'm not abandoning anyone, I answered evenly. I'm simply allowing 2 capable adults to manage the decision they made. Melissa came back onto the line. Mom, please. Her voice sounded softer now. We'll pay you back. I closed my eyes. I'd heard that sentence dozens of times. Very little had ever been repaid. I wish you the best, I said. But this is no longer my responsibility. Before either of them could continue, I ended the call. The quiet returned instantly. That evening, I sat on my back porch with a glass of iced tea. Birds settled into the trees as the sun disappeared behind the rooftops. I couldn't remember the last evening I'd spent without worrying about someone else's bills. The next morning, another task remained. The Honda SUV. 5 years earlier, I had given Melissa my old vehicle after buying a smaller sedan. Although the title had been transferred into her name, I had kept paying the insurance because Derek's driving history made their premiums unaffordable. Every month it cost me nearly $200. I called my insurance agent. Good morning, Linda. Margaret, How are you? I need to remove one vehicle from my policy today. No problem. Within 15 minutes, the paperwork was complete. The SUV was no longer covered under my insurance. Immediately afterward, I sent Melissa a brief text. The insurance policy on the Honda ended today. Please arrange your own coverage immediately. Whether she received it or not was no longer my concern. Later that afternoon, Daniel returned carrying a small hardware bag. What now? I asked. He smiled. I bought new deadbolts. I looked at him curiously. You still think they'll come back? He nodded without hesitation. I don't think they'll ask. I think they'll expect. For a long moment, I stared at my front door. Then I stepped aside. Go ahead. Sometimes protecting your peace begins with changing more than your finances. Sometimes it begins with changing the locks. Daniel finished installing the new locks just before sunset. He tested each one twice before handing me the new keys. There, he said. Now only the people you trust can walk through this door. I slipped the keys into my pocket. It wasn't just a new lock. It felt like a new chapter. After Daniel left, I wandered into the garage. For years, I had barely been able to park my sedan inside because nearly half the space belonged to Derek. Power tools, boxes of old clothes, camping equipment, a rusted exercise bench. Broken furniture he swore he would pick up next weekend. That weekend had never arrived. I stood there looking at the clutter. Enough was enough. I grabbed my phone and began taking photographs. Every toolbox, every ladder, every storage bin. I wanted a record of everything before touching it. Then I downloaded a neighborhood marketplace app. One by one, I listed the items at reasonable prices. Nothing fancy, just enough to move them quickly. Within an hour, my phone buzzed with interested buyers. By noon the following day, people were arriving one after another. A young mechanic purchased most of the power tools. A college student bought the exercise equipment. An elderly couple happily loaded gardening supplies into their pickup truck. Cash exchanged hands. Smiles were shared. By late afternoon, almost everything was gone. The remaining broken furniture and worthless junk were stacked neatly beside the curb for the city's bulk trash pickup. When the garage finally stood empty, I swept every corner. Dust floated through the sunlight pouring in from the open door. For the first time in years, both of my cars fit comfortably inside. I stood there smiling. It wasn't about the extra space. It was about reclaiming what had slowly stopped feeling like mine. That evening, my phone rang from an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. Hello, Margaret? It was Melissa. I borrowed Carol's phone. Carol was Derek's mother. I figured. Melissa wasted no time. Mom, why did you cancel everything? I didn't cancel everything. You know what I mean. Our phones stopped working. I informed you the plan was ending. You stranded us. No, you chose to move. I heard Derek shouting something in the background. Melissa lowered her voice. We're staying in Derek's parents' basement. I hope that works out. It isn't. What happened? She hesitated. There isn't enough room. I said nothing, she continued. The kids are sleeping on air mattresses. I'm sorry to hear that. You could fix all of this. How? Turn the phones back on. No, Mom. And maybe send enough money until Derek finds work. There it was, the real reason for the call. It wasn't about missing me. It wasn't about apologizing. It was about money. Melissa, I said gently. Did you call to ask how I'm doing? Silence. Did you wonder how I felt finding out you'd moved after it was already done? Nothing. Did you apologize for removing things from my house without asking? Another long pause. Finally, she whispered, No, I didn't think so. Her voice suddenly became sharp. You've changed. Yes, I don't even recognize you. I've started recognizing myself. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Derek grabbed the phone. This is unbelievable. What is? You're treating your own family like strangers. I remained calm. No, Derek. I finally stopped treating adults like children. You owe us. That sentence almost made me laugh. I owe you. You've always helped. I helped because I loved you. Exactly. No, I corrected him. Love is a gift. It isn't a lifetime contract. His breathing became heavier. The kids don't have enough groceries. I hope their parents solve that. You really don't care? I care deeply. But caring doesn't mean financing every decision you make. Before he could argue further, I ended the call. I placed the phone on the table and walked outside. The evening air felt wonderfully cool. For years I had confused generosity with obligation. Every time I rescued them, they delayed learning how to stand on their own. Perhaps the greatest kindness wasn't writing another check. Perhaps it was finally stepping aside. 3 peaceful weeks passed. My sewing room was nearly finished. I joined a local book club. I met old friends for lunch without worrying that Melissa would suddenly call, asking for money before the check arrived. Then one Saturday morning, Daniel stopped by carrying coffee. "You won't believe what happened," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "What now? They're already having problems in Tennessee." I looked at him quietly. "Derek still hasn't found a full-time job." He shook his head. "And his parents just told them they'll have to start paying rent next month." I slowly stirred my coffee. Reality, it seemed, had finally caught up with them. Over the next month, my life settled into a rhythm I hadn't experienced in years. Every morning began with a walk through the neighborhood before the streets became busy. I returned home, watered the flowers lining my porch, and spent an hour in what had once been the grandchildren's room. Now it was my sewing and reading studio. The walls were painted a soft cream color. Sunlight streamed through the windows, and shelves held novels instead of plastic toys. Whenever I sat in my favorite chair with a cup of coffee, I felt something I hadn't realized was missing. Peace, not the kind that comes from silence. The kind that comes from finally setting healthy boundaries. One afternoon, Daniel stopped by carrying a small bakery box. "I brought cinnamon rolls. I knew there had to be a reason you were smiling," I joked. He laughed before becoming serious. "I heard from Melissa. I looked up from my sewing machine. How is she?" "Tired." He sat across from me. "Derek finally found work. That's good. It's only part-time at a warehouse." I nodded quietly. "And Melissa has been working evening shifts at a diner." I felt relief more than sympathy. They weren't failing. They were finally standing on their own feet. Daniel hesitated. "She asked if I'd speak to you." "What did she want?" "A loan." I couldn't help smiling. "Of course," she said. "They just need $3,000 to get into a better apartment." I folded the fabric in my lap before answering. "And what did you tell her?" "I said it wasn't my place." "Thank you," she cried. I expected she would. Daniel leaned back in his chair. "I don't think she's angry anymore. No, I think she's scared. Fear has a way of arriving when the safety net disappears. For years, every poor decision had been softened by someone else's sacrifice. Now every choice carried its own consequences. That wasn't cruelty. That was adulthood. The following week, I made a decision of my own. Instead of sending money across the country, I opened my savings account and looked at the balance. For the first time in years, it was growing instead of shrinking. There was enough to do something I had postponed for decades: travel. I opened my laptop and searched for guided tours through the Blue Ridge Mountains, beautiful cabins, historic towns, scenic train rides. I smiled as I read through the itinerary, then I clicked Book Now. For once, I spent money without guilt. Not because someone needed rescuing, because I deserved to enjoy the retirement I had worked 40 years to earn. A few days later, Daniel called. "They're coming back." I looked up from packing my suitcase. "What do you mean?" "They left Tennessee yesterday." "Why?" Derek argued with his father. "Badly?" "Bad enough that his parents told them to leave." I closed my suitcase slowly. "When will they get here?" "Probably tomorrow afternoon." After ending the call, I walked through my house. Everything looked different than it had only 2 months earlier. The garage was organized. The sewing room was finished. Fresh flowers bloomed beside the front porch. Most importantly, the locks had been changed. Late the next afternoon, the doorbell rang. I already knew who it was. Looking through the peephole confirmed it. Melissa stood on the porch looking exhausted. Her hair was pulled into a messy ponytail. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes. Beside her stood Derek, carrying 2 duffel bags. The children sat quietly on the front steps. I unlocked the wooden door, but I left the heavy security screen locked. Melissa immediately reached for the handle. "It won't open, I know." Her face fell. "Mom, hello, Melissa." She forced a tired smile. "We've had a rough trip. I'm sorry to hear that." She glanced toward the children before looking back at me. "We just need a place to stay. For a few weeks, until we can save enough for another apartment." Before I could answer, Derek stepped forward. "I also need my tools from the garage." His confidence surprised me. I looked directly at him. "You won't find them." His forehead wrinkled. "What does that mean?" "I sold everything you left here." The color drained from his face. "You sold my tools. You abandoned them on my property for over 2 years. You had no right. I gave you plenty of opportunities to collect them." Melissa stared at me in disbelief. "You actually sold them?" "Yes." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. For the first time, they realized the woman standing behind the locked door wasn't the same mother they had taken for granted. Melissa's eyes filled with tears as she stared through the locked security door. "Mom, please." Her voice trembled. "We don't have anywhere else to go." I looked past her at my 2 grandchildren. They looked exhausted after what had clearly been a long drive. My heart ached for them, but I reminded myself that none of this had been their decision. "I'm sorry they're going through this," I said quietly. "They're your grandchildren," Derek snapped. "You're really going to leave them standing out here?" I met his gaze without raising my voice. "I'm not leaving them anywhere. Their parents are responsible for finding them a safe place to sleep." His jaw tightened. "So that's it? After everything?" I almost smiled. "After everything," I repeated. "Let's talk about everything." Melissa lowered her head. "I spent years helping you both because I wanted my grandchildren to have a stable life. I paid your phone bills, your insurance, and your credit card. I gave you a vehicle, stored your belongings, and welcomed you into this home whenever you needed help." Neither of them spoke. "But when you decided to move across the country, you didn't tell me. You packed my grandchildren into a truck, emptied half of this house while pretending everything was normal, and called only after you were already gone." Melissa quietly wiped away a tear. "I know, no," I replied gently. "I don't think you truly did." She looked up. "I was hurt, Melissa. Not because you moved. Because you decided I wasn't important enough to tell." For a long moment, only the sound of birds filled the quiet neighborhood. Finally, she whispered, "I'm sorry." Those 2 words had been missing for weeks. "I should have told you. Yes, I should have asked before taking those things. Yes, I was afraid you'd try to stop us." I nodded. "Maybe I would have asked questions. But I would never have stopped you from building your own life." Derek shifted uncomfortably. "I made things worse," he admitted. It was the first time I had ever heard him accept responsibility for anything. "I kept telling Melissa we'd figure everything out." "And did you?" I asked. He sighed. "No, we depended on everyone else." I could see the weight of reality on both of their faces. Life had finally taught them lessons my financial support had delayed for years. Melissa looked toward the children before speaking again. "Can we come inside? Just for tonight?" I took a slow breath. Every instinct as a mother wanted to unlock the door. But another voice reminded me of everything that had happened. Boundaries only work when they remain boundaries. "I'm afraid the answer is no." Fresh tears rolled down Melissa's cheeks, but she didn't argue. Instead, she nodded. "I understand. There are 2 affordable motels near the interstate," I said. "I'll text you their addresses." She looked surprised. "I'm also willing to meet the children at the park tomorrow. I'll spend the day with them while you both look for apartments." Her shoulders relaxed. "You'd do that?" "Of course. My relationship with my grandchildren has never been the problem." Derek slowly extended his hand through the opening in the screen. "I'm sorry, Margaret." After a brief hesitation, I shook it. "I hope you mean that." "I do." Without another word, they gathered their bags and walked back toward their car. The children waved. I smiled and waved back. As I watched them drive away, I didn't feel victorious. I felt peaceful. The following afternoon, I met my grandchildren at the local park exactly as promised. We played on the swings, shared sandwiches, fed ducks by the pond, and laughed together for hours. Melissa and Derek spent the day searching for affordable housing. A week later, Daniel called with an update. They found a small apartment. That's wonderful. It isn't fancy. It doesn't have to be. Derek accepted a full-time warehouse position. And Melissa? She's keeping her diner job until they're caught up on bills. I smiled. They'll be okay. They will now, Daniel agreed. Several months later, I boarded the train for the Blue Ridge Mountains, the trip I had dreamed about for years. As rolling hills passed outside my window, I reflected on everything that had happened. Love does not require unlimited sacrifice. Helping some should never mean allowing yourself to be used. Sometimes the greatest act of love is stepping back and allowing the people you care about to experience the consequences of their own decisions. Melissa and I eventually rebuilt our relationship. Not because I rescued her again, but because we finally learned to respect one another as adults. My grandchildren continued visiting often. The sewing room remained my favorite place in the house. And every time I locked my front door at night, I was reminded that protecting my peace had never been selfish. It had simply been necessary.